Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Fractional Impact. Today we're going to be sitting down with Tyler, who is going to be our revenue legend that we're going to be interviewing today. Today I'm joined by Zan as well. Zan, would you like to give us a quick intro?
Yeah, sure. I'm Zan, so I help with sales and client delivery. And so, of course, very excited to hear what you have to say today, Tyler.
Superb. And so Tyler Brock, he's helped early stage SaaS companies grow from founder-led sales into structured, repeatable motions. He's also scaled teams at companies like GBG Loqate, Beyond, Mention, Wiser, and numerous startups through his work at Revenue Ignition. So Tyler, would you like to give us an introduction for yourself?
Yeah, would love to. And thanks for having me here today. My name is Tyler Brock. I've been working in early stage startup sales for the last 15 or so years. You could say I'm addicted to it. What I really love is that early stage building of the machine, building the motion from the ground up, one block at a time. And what I do now is I help coach early stage startups on building their early stage sales motions. Oftentimes it takes the form of going from a founder-led motion to repeatable motion, but it can also be a team that maybe has $5-10 million in revenue and fundamentally needs some help in making some changes to get to the next level.
Excellent. Okay, so you're in the hot seat today. I'm very interested myself. I've been working as a fractional executive for the last 10 years. I'm always excited to meet other fractional executives who are great at what they do, because everybody has their own kind of unique and special sauce, and hopefully we're going to get some nuggets from you today. All right. So I'm curious just to start off with, so when you enter a company with a founder-led sales operation, what helps you understand where the gaps are?
Yep. It starts with, first off, understanding the pipeline. It all flows from that. And I think sometimes it sounds very simplistic, but I think sometimes people overlook that. Now, there's a few things there. There's not just looking at the overall pipeline number. Oftentimes it's diving into the pipeline to understand the level of quality too. Oftentimes founders haven't been sellers before, and it's very easy to get a sense of what we call as happy ears, where you get excited about a deal, but how real is it really? So making sure we're just vetting out our pipeline and understanding what are our true deals, what's that real pipeline that we're working with. That's number one. Number two is looking at our performance. So what's our conversion look like? What types of deal sizes are we working with? How long do our deal cycles usually take? And how does that shift over segments? Right? Is it the case that in our enterprise segment it takes us way too long to close those deals, or is it something that we're closing that we're closing 100K deals in 2 weeks? In that case, let's go ahead and pour more gas in the fire. Next is looking at the funnel. So from a deal coming in or a meeting coming in all the way to a deal being closed, looking at each and every stage to see what is our biggest drop-off point and how can we fine-tune the funnel. And then finally, an ICP exercise. So that stands for ideal client profile. And it's just looking at what we see as being the different ICPs we're targeting and looking at what's our conversion across each of those. How good are we at closing those clients? Because oftentimes early stage companies cast a really big shotgun blast, which I think is a good starting point. But as you start to get the data, you can refine and focus on the segments of your ICP that convert the best. Because at the end of the day, time, bandwidth, cash are all limited resources in a startup. So you want that time and energy be going towards the ICP that converts at the highest rate, that has the proverbial lowest hanging fruit.
Fantastic. So very methodical, pragmatic, and a big reason as to why companies struggle to get that consistency. So excellent to know that you're right on the kind of pulse with that kind of 3-step process. What does a healthy transition from founder-led sales to a formal process look like?
Yep, I would break it out into 3 kind of fundamental, pretty basic steps. It's deciding the when, deciding the who, and deciding the how. Now, when we think of deciding the when, now this can vary depending on the founder, the market. I always say that you really should start with the founder selling first before taking that step of hiring sellers. And I also say that even after you hire sellers as a founder, or this is the founding CEO, you're always going to be a part of deals all the way through. I mean, Mark Benioff frequently talks about going out to show love to his biggest clients, and Salesforce is worth several $100 billion. It goes to show that customer centricity does a lot to help scale a business. But obviously, as a founder, you start to take a step back a lot sooner than that. So that win is when you have a really good, strong pipeline where you look at your goals and you're more than 5-6x of your goals in pipeline. That tells you have a pretty good pipeline coverage ratio, assuming a 20% conversion rate. If your conversion rate's lower, you want to just do the inverse of that. Similarly, if your conversion's higher, then you may not need as much pipeline coverage. That starts there. Hiring a seller when there isn't really a pipeline is typically putting that person in a bit of a challenge. Not to say it's insurmountable, but it's a bit more challenging. And you may be a little bit too soon to do that if the pipeline isn't there, showing you that the market is demanding it.
Yeah.
So the first would be the win. That's when I would say normally you do that, and that's usually going to fall. I typically find somewhere between $300,000 and $500,000 in ARR typically, but different companies do that at a different pace. I'd say the who. Then I guess I can move on to the who, which is the profile. A few things here. A few common mistakes that I see is getting the who dramatically wrong. Early stage startups, I mentioned around the 500K mark is where you see this happen frequently. To go back to that Salesforce analogy, hiring someone from Salesforce to join a company that's doing 500K ARR typically has a pretty high failure rate, just because that person doesn't have the experience or their experience at Salesforce is very different than what's going to be required in an early stage startup. Surviving in ambiguity, building playbooks from the ground up. As you probably imagine, it's a very different motion, selling a new product and creating a new market versus Salesforce established motion, thousands of sellers, billions on marketing any given year. So making sure that ideally they have stage appropriate experience, that they have sold similar deal sizes with a similar level of complexity. So if you have a very transactional sales cycle, spending a bunch of money on an enterprise seller probably doesn't make the most sense. And I would say the inverse, if you have an enterprise sales cycle and you go looking for transactional sellers. And I'd also say when you hire your first seller, if you have the cash and the pipeline to justify it, hiring two. I think hiring two is better than one. It allows the two sellers to compete against one another. You cover more ground as well. And you have, oftentimes it creates an even stronger foundation than hiring one, because if that person doesn't work out, you're not clear on, is it them? Is it the motion? It helps you to prove things out and move at a more rapid pace. Now, finally, the how, since we've gone through the when and the who. As you look at transitioning, the key is giving these folks as they come in a playbook to succeed. Now, the first bit there is looking at what is your ideal sales cycle, and that means as a founder looking in the mirror of when we've closed deals, what's that kind of from beginning to end process that seems to really nail it, and let's institutionalize that. And that's one of the first things I typically do with my clients. So it's institutionalizing this knowledge that oftentimes lives in founders' heads of how we move deals through and formalizing that into deal checklists, playbooks, also incorporating that into a clear onboarding 30, 60, 90 for sellers so that they can crush from day one. Also, too, making sure we're setting clear goals for sellers as they come on, albeit with a lot more flexibility than if we were to be Mark Benioff setting goals for an AE at Salesforce. It's understandable. We can set goals and we want to set them reasonably based on the data in front of us. But at that stage, oftentimes those goals are going to shift a bit. And so long as we're being flexible and reasonable, while still ensuring that there's an element of accountability, that's key in coming into that process of making that transition. And I would say, finally, when I talked about the how and the process, that's just the V1. This should be a process that's being constantly reviewed and being iterated on every week, every month, and additions made to it so that 6 months later, that process should look a lot different because we've learned so much, we've added on so much more to it that we're on V10, 11, or whatever it may be. So that constant learning cycle helps to fine tune the how of the process. So just to recap that, first off is when. Don't go too soon. Make sure you have a good pipeline to justify hiring a seller. Who, making sure that they're stage appropriate, domain appropriate, ACV appropriate, and ideally go for two. And the how, make sure we have a clear understanding of what that ideal cycle looks like, institutionalizing that into a playbook and checklists, setting clear goals, and iterating on all that as we collect data and learn more about what's working for us.
Like it. And Zan, I know you have a strong sales background and so forth. Have you been able to follow Tyler's breakdown quite closely, or any kind of questions about that?
Yeah, no, I think that really makes a lot of sense, and I can't agree more. So I'd like to maybe tuck in a little bit more, coming from the perspective of a salesperson, but many salespeople tend to struggle in their early careers, and I just like to find out from you what coaching approaches have helped you unlock performance quickly.
Yep. There's a few things that jump out to me. The first is making sure you're listening to all your calls, cold calls, listening to your demos, And if you don't have and these days it's so easy to have a call recording software without having to pony up the bill for Gong or one of the more expensive solutions, but just listening and thinking through what could I have done differently at every stage of that call. And similarly, if you're on a team where the founder is still taking sales calls or there's other sellers, listening to whoever the best seller is, listening to as many of their calls as possible to identify what are they doing that's really different. Now, ideally, you're in an org where there's already a mindset and a culture of constant improvement, where this is happening in not an automated way, but it's programmed in where you have ongoing coaching sessions around these things. But if not, I would certainly even send over a recording or two to your boss and proactively ask for that feedback. Now, like I said, with my clients, what I recommend is, or what I do is I listen to one of their AE's calls each week and provide feedback to that AE. So I do think it should be encoded, but as a seller, because you asked the question from a seller's perspective, is if that doesn't exist, make sure you're being proactive about not just listening to it, but asking for that feedback on those recordings. A few things to listen for on those recordings that I find helps a ton. First off, and this is very, very basic, and it starts with your discovery. I know that's probably a bit tired, but I still hear sellers who've sold for 10, 15 years not really do a great job of discovery, of understanding the pain point. It's one thing if someone says, we're looking for a solution because this is wasting time for us. And I think a lot of sellers stop there. That pain point development of what does that mean? How much time is being wasted? So I think discovery, that's a key unlock that helps everything else that follows. The analogy I use is we're ultimately kind of tailors. And if you go to a tailor and they don't really take your measurements, they can't really cut a particularly good suit for you, right? And that discovery is really gathering those measurements so that everything that follows is very finely tuned to our prospect and ultimately what they're looking for. And part of that is, as we're going through that discovery, making sure we're listening to what that challenge is. And I see the best sellers I see are phenomenal storytellers, where they have a bank of stories in their mind that's tied to the core pain points that they hear a lot. And as they're talking through their product, and they're not just listing off features, they're talking through stories of how customers have come with a challenge that's similar to the one the prospect has, how they've addressed it, and what the end result was of that. The stories resonate a lot more on sales calls than just listing off, well, we do X, Y, and Z. That doesn't really resonate because people aren't coming for features, they're coming for solutions to their challenges.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah, that's great.
Incredible.
I love that.
So Tyler, I love how you're able to break down all these kind of separate parts of the jigsaw, but let's get on to results. All right. So I know that you were able to double the revenue for one of your clients in 1 quarter. Is that right?
Yep.
So yeah, I'm just curious, like what worked in that kind of scenario?
Yeah, it was really all the things we talked about above, or not above, I should say, already, applied into motion and coming together in a really great way. So where did we start? We started with making sure we were looking at the right ICP. That's the ideal customer profile. So I did a deep dive into each of their ICPs, looked at the conversion across each, revenue across each, to confirm that we were in fact targeting the right folks, which it ended up being the case that we were. We made the call to hire reps at the right time when there was a pipeline and enough traction to justify it. And we focused on the right folks. So we got folks who came with domain experience, who were stage appropriate, had startup experience. And in advance of them coming on board, we worked on institutionalizing a clear playbook of what the ideal sales cycle looks like, knowing it's going to be constantly iterated on. So they had a process to start to work towards. And we set goals that were ultimately flexible. Now, when I say flexible, I want to be clear here. I'm not trying to shirk responsibility, but it is just to say when we brought them on, we said, hey, look, here's the goal for your first 90 days. You're our first reps. Once we get to the end of the 90 days, we'll have a clearer steer on what a full annual target will look like thereafter. And being very clear and upfront about all of that. And also to being willing to collect their feedback and understanding what's reasonable and making it a collaborative process as opposed to just a huge number handed on down from on high that's completely unrealistic and is completely unachievable. So by doing those things, making sure we're nailing the ICP, hiring the right folks at the right time, and regimenting our sales process of what good looks like, we're able to grow really rapidly. They're in a really phenomenal place, and they're actually getting ready to raise a really material Series A anytime this week, actually.
Fantastic. So it sounds very much like it's more about mastering the basics as opposed to leaping on all these advanced techniques and so forth. Would that sound about right?
Absolutely. I think that stuff is great. And I mean, I think a lot of that stuff is, it's great to add on top, but the basics, the foundational pieces are still the same. And you can't get to all the great stuff until you master the basics and have a good foundation for your house. If you're focused on the crown molding, but the foundation of your house is rotting, well, that's not going to end particularly well.
Yeah. And of course, importantly, when you're building that foundation, doing the right things in the right order, right? So people think, oh, it's just the foundation. That's easy, but there are things that have to come first, Very cool. So in terms of, so I loved what you were talking about in terms of ordering 2 salespeople, because I was just thinking, well, that's great for covering blind spots, But I'm just curious to find out, what common founder blind spots do you see in the kind of early stage go-to-market?
Yeah, there's a few that jump out. I think the one that jumps out the most is looking at it as sellers inherently by hiring, or is looking at their headcount plan as being seller driven as opposed to being pipeline driven. What I mean by that is, really how we look at our growth plan should be determined by what's the rate that we can generate pipeline, and then effectively serve that pipeline and convert that pipeline into deals by having sellers. And yes, sellers do need to be generating their own pipeline. That is absolutely critical. But at the same time, I see a lot of founders who focus less on, say, marketing or hiring BDRs, or how are we going to fill the funnel, and let's just hire sellers and that'll work itself out. And when there isn't that intentionality around how are we going to generate pipeline for these sellers, how much pipeline do they need to get to their goals, and doing a full kind of bottoms up analysis of the headcount plan, you oftentimes get folks who dramatically overhire, and that can be absolutely corrosive to not just a sales org, but an entire company, where you have overhiring to the point of, you overhired for your market, goals aren't being achieved, morale on the team absolutely plummets. You get to a place of losing your momentum, potentially even having to do layoffs. So I think that's the biggest one, is looking at your headcount plan and making sure you have a plan to generate the pipeline to get there. And you've done the numbers of how many demos does that mean? What's the ACV? What's the conversion we're implying through all of these things? So we have a clear top to bottom understanding of how we're going to get to the goal, how we're going to generate the pipeline, how we're going to bring sellers in to complement that, as opposed to just hiring the sellers and hiring a bunch of them and saying, we'll figure it out.
Yeah. That's kind of like, if we hire them, then the leads will come, right?
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So get the pipeline packed first and then start expanding the sales team. Yeah. Love it. Okay. So, and Zan kind of touched upon this, it's like, so many salespeople do struggle. So what are the best things that founders can do to make them kind of more strategic in the way in which they're selling the product?
Yep. I think it starts with what I mentioned a bit ago, which was making sure we have a culture of ongoing coaching. So one of the things I like to have with my clients and have done with teams that I've managed is like what I call a coach's corner. And what it is sometimes it's on a weekly basis, sometimes it's bi-weekly, depending on the team size, where we as a team all sit down, listen to one of the sellers' calls, and we bring feedback to that call. And it's if it's a team of 2 or 3, it's us getting together, talking about what we liked about the call, what could have been better. But I think that's one of the big things, is like making sure we're coming together, giving each other coaching on what could be better, and learning from that and iterating on that. And similarly, that's just one step. I think there's also that culture of driving and pushing your team members to listen to their own calls to get better. And also outside the team context, as a founder, listening to calls and providing feedback individually to folks as well too. With the tools that exist today, you don't always have to listen to the call from beginning to end. You can keyword search for specific things, maybe pricing, maybe one, or a specific feature that you want to learn. You want to see how that seller approached it. You can search that and jump to that segment. But I would say the biggest thing is that, like, that coaching piece at 3 levels. 1, at the team level, making sure we have an ongoing meeting. 2, we're pushing sellers to listen to their own calls and learn from that. And 3, as a founder, as a VP or CRO, we're proactively listening and providing one-to-one coaching separately too. it is painful at first as a seller to listen to how you sound on the phone. I know we've all had that feeling of hearing our own recording. Maybe not you, Finn, because you have a phenomenal radio telephone voice. But for the rest of us mere mortals, listening to our own voice can be a bit off-putting, but it's absolutely critical to getting better in sales because that our voice is ultimately our medium.
Yeah, got you. I can see Zan like nodding her head there in terms of like, don't like listen to my voice and that kind of thing. It'd be really cool actually just to get that insight from you, Zan, is that, you know, listening to your own calls versus, you know, training in methodology and process, how much insight do you actually gather despite the fact that you hate listening to your own voice?
So much, actually, you know, so in real time, there's things that you won't necessarily pick up on. And, you know, when you're looking at the video afterwards, and it's like, okay, so you realize there's so much that you realize afterwards. And then, you know, to add on to that, what's also great when you share that with your team or with the founder and they review those videos, the feedback that they have, it's also covering your blind spots. So again, picking up things that you definitely wouldn't see. So it is really such a valuable exercise. And in terms of growing, you know, as a salesperson, can't agree more, highly recommend it.
Yeah. And I can tell, are you go, Tyler?
Yeah, one thing I'd add to what Zan said is it's also to her point on it's remarkable the things we say and do that sometimes we kind of even forget or a little bit happen almost subconsciously. I say a lot, and I only really realized it in listening calls. And please hold me accountable here if you hear me saying but it was something that only came about when I started listening to my calls and realizing it and started coaching myself on it. Lots of things that, you know, without that hard look in the mirror, as frustrating, as off-putting as it can be to listen to our own voices, it's the only way to really get that feedback.
Yeah, you just said by the way. Cool, yeah. I was just going to say,
I just look in the mirror more apparently and do some more call recording coaching with myself.
Well, I was just going to say, just as I feel totally self-conscious about how many times I've said so far, it totally made me relax. And it's like, he said it as well. So it's okay. You know, we don't have to be perfect. It's all good.
Exactly right.
So thanks for that. So what changes when a company grows from a few deals a month to a steady pipeline? You know, so what kind of changes within that process?
Absolutely. And I think one of the key things there is, you really go from where it's kind of haphazard. We have a few deals to it really needs to be a regimented motion that we're able to convert deals on a consistent basis. So I think it goes from the case of, you know, we don't have a process. It's held together by tape to absolutely needing a process, but not just needing a process, but needing to have a strong infrastructure supporting the team. You know, no one loves meetings, but well-organized team meetings serve a really important function in making sure that as our team grows, as we have a bigger pipeline, we add to that, we're communicating effectively as the product is changing and evolving. What can we sell? What can't we sell? Also, you know, as you have more of a full pipeline, depending on your sale and what you're selling, the cross-functional element becomes even more important, right? Maybe it's you require a lot of professional services support with internally, or maybe it's solution architect support. Also, too, by that phase, usually there's a lot more internal coordination with marketing and CS as well, too, as you're handing deals over to them after they ultimately come on board. So I think because there's just so much more going on and there's so much that can fall between the cracks, that steady infrastructure backed up by team meetings, the playbooks that I mentioned, clear processes of how things move through, which should be done, and checklists to support that so it's easy for AEs to come on board. And then also one other thing I mentioned a bit earlier is just a clear 30, 60, 90 for onboarding folks. It takes a ton, you know, it's one thing when you have one AE or one seller to onboard or two, but it's more important when you have a team of 4 or 5, you have a repeatable process that includes good elements of self-learning in there too. Because as important as training is, the more we can make it we don't let it become a time suck, but at the same time, really effectively ramping our team up as fast as possible becomes especially key as you scale from just a few deals to a steady pipeline, because your time gets pulled in so many different directions. So that time management piece and having that effective training process for the new folks as they come on becomes even more essential.
Yeah. And as a founder is bringing on, like, you know, a sales team, so say it's not just 2, it's 3, maybe 4, like what should a founder be thinking about within that process?
Yep. One thing one thing I didn't cover that I want to make sure I get to here, Finn, is, and I'm going to get to your question, which is, what should we think about once we bring them on? But I also want to go back to like how we bring folks on board and how we vet out top tier folks to even get to the 4 that we want to bring on board and ramp with us. And there's a few tips I have there. When we look at, I mentioned a few of them as far as the profiles we're looking for, people that are stage appropriate, people that ideally have experience in a similar stage is what I mean by that. But as we're going through the interview process, it's absolutely important that we're having some sort of live role play. So for SDRs, I usually do mock cold calls. For AEs, I do a live demo, oftentimes of the product that for the client that I have, they're going to have their product be the one that's demoed by the interviewee. Now, keep in mind, like we're not asking them to do the full product, but we're asking for like a snippet of it, call it like 5 or 10 minutes. And we ask them to do a little bit of discovery, talk through the product with a few slides that they put together, and then make sure that they're setting up the sales cycle well at the end. Because I find that it's oftentimes easy for sellers to talk themselves up in the interview process, but we want to really test their skills and see how well they do. One of the things I like to do as a part of that is actually I provide feedback on once they go through and do the presentation, and I have them do it again. Because inevitably it's not going to be perfect. It shouldn't be, or it's not just because it's so hard to nail a product you haven't sold before. And what I'm really looking for is that growth from the first try to the second try, because that coachability piece is absolutely essential in any sales org. And one of the key things that I like to interview for. So I'm going to get back to the core of your question, Finn, which is what do we do once we have 4 folks and we need to run an effective org with them? But I just wanted to call out like the important pieces to make sure we give extra attention to vet out who the right 4 folks are. Now, onto the key of your question before I went down a little bit of a side rabbit hole, but thanks for your patience, is what does the org look like when we move 4 folks? Well, then it's absolutely critical that we have, and this is something that I was talking to one of my clients about, is like we have to have a regular team meeting. We want to invite marketing to that, or we want to invite someone from CS to that. We want to make sure that we're covering as much information as possible and everything that could be relevant, because we're no longer at the place where it's just a founder and one other AE sitting in a room and information flows just by the founder turning around and saying, hey, Jonna, this new product got released. So that how that information flows becomes absolutely critical. So make sure we have organized team meetings, organized ways of communicating what marketing is doing, what products are being released, how we can sell them, what not to sell, also importantly. And as we look at having the 4 sellers coming on board, that becomes even more key. But one of the other benefits it gives us is it gives us another test of our process. So as they go through our 30, 60, 90, collecting feedback from them as far as what can we make even better for the next time we bring another class on board.
Got it. And Zan, Tyler touched on something which was around role play and that kind of thing. So yeah, we spoke about how challenging it can be to listen to our own voices and learn at the same time, because it's almost like the nails down the chalkboard effect, But how effective is role playing within the kind of sales environment when it comes to your experience of working with different companies?
It's so important. It's really, and that's the thing. I in my experience, I wouldn't say that all companies actually do it, and I think that they're really missing out. You can sense the lack of training and kind of skill, of the salesperson if that wasn't part of the foundation. So I think it's such a core, important thing to do at the beginning. And the thing is also every sales job is going to be different, so having that role play and becoming really specific in your sales strategy and product specific to what you're doing then. So key important. Yeah. So I think it's a really great exercise.
Yeah, superb. And I totally recommend for anybody that's listening in, like hire somebody like Tyler because he knows exactly what he's looking for, right? So when it comes to listening to call recordings or when it comes to setting up role plays and those kind of things, yes, we can all do these kind of things, but to do it with skill and precision and actually kind of diagnose things on the fly, like in real time, it takes somebody with like a very nuanced expertise in order to do that, So I totally encourage people listening in, because perhaps you're too close to your process as well. Like that's the big thing I see with founders is, yeah, we know the product, blah blah blah, but the thing is you're losing out on first of all inside or outside kind of inspiration, but then the other thing is that your own blind spots as well. Like everybody has blind spots. There's no human being that has zero blind spots, so when you kind of put your super A team together on that kind of thing, somebody like Tyler can be really, really beneficial when it comes to accelerating the results of the sales team, and he's got the credentials to back it up, which I love. So Tyler, back to you. When does it make sense to bring in a CRO or a VP of sales?
Yep, and this can vary. It varies a decent amount depending on the org. What I typically recommend is sometimes one of the biggest mistakes I see is a founder says, "Oh, I don't really want to deal with sales. I want to hire a VP before I hire any AEs." That I oftentimes find doesn't work because first you want to get at least 2 AEs in seat hitting their goal before looking at hiring a VP, and sometimes folks even wait later than that. So I would say, unless there's some very exceptional circumstance, I'd say get 2 AEs doing well, then look at getting your VP to then scale more rapidly, because that shows, hey, we have traction, we have something that works. Now let's make what is oftentimes one of the most expensive hires, if not the most expensive hire you can make as a startup, to pour gas on this fire and go even faster. Some folks I see wait even longer than that, and I think it can work depending on the founder's bandwidth and their sales acumen. But certainly, I think you don't want to go too far beyond 4 or 5, because then that usually means there's not as much attention to the details, and there's probably some bottlenecks if a CEO is managing 5 AEs in addition to all the other responsibilities that come with being a CEO. So I would say that 2 to 5 range. The key again is we have AEs that are doing well in situ, right? If you have 2 AEs that we're looking at and we're saying, well, we're struggling to get pipeline, we're struggling to get deals closed, and we can't diagnose it as being because of them, and it could be just the market, the traction isn't there. That's a very different story. If it is the case that, hey, look, looks like we need more sales acumen to turn this around, that could be a case for a VP, but I want to be very careful there, because I think sometimes people look at that with rose-tinted glasses and will make that big expensive hire, even though it's a more fundamental issue about their product market fit.
Thanks, Tyler. And just in case there's any gaps for anybody watching or listening in, can you clarify what exactly is an AE? Like, what does that stand for?
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Finn. I appreciate that. An AE is an account executive. So this is someone who is ultimately going through product demos with your prospects, handling all the follow-up all the way down to closing the deal. And sometimes in the early stage, they're still managing the deal post-cycle. Eventually you have, and usually pretty early on, you have a CX team or a customer success team or customer experience team that they then hand that person on to. An AE or an account executive also does their own prospecting. So that is going out and doing cold outbound. Now, I mentioned the BDR or SDR role earlier, so I'll also give that acronym too. That's a sales development representative or a business development representative. The two are essentially the same thing, and this person is just responsible for setting meetings to then hand over to the account executive to then ultimately close. So these are folks, this is ultimately the entry path into sales. These are folks who oftentimes are earlier in their career. And the typical growth track, although there's certainly a number of them, is SDRs after a year or two, then move into AE roles.
Got you. And I just like to kind of clarify these things because we never know who's going to be listening, and it might be somebody who's not quite ready to work with you, So, it's always kind of useful to kind of provide value at that level as well. So thanks for clarifying that. Zan, had you come across the AE term before, or anything that Tyler said that you haven't come across before?
Well, of course, he's quite the expert, so it's just the detail he's gone into yeah, it's just on a much higher level, but I've been exposed to the same processes in the playbook, and it just makes absolute sense, and definitely couldn't agree more.
Cool. It wasn't a trick question or anything. I wasn't trying to catch you out. It's just the case that, because we're in different, you can probably tell by accents, Tyler's in New York, I'm in Scotland, and Zan is in Cape Town. It's like acronyms change, between different cultures and that kind of thing as well. So, just making sure we've got alignment and understanding, because the more that everybody can get out of this, the better, the more valuable this is. So thanks for that, Tyler. And just lastly, what simple habits or practices make the biggest difference in improving sales conversion?
Yep. It starts with the ICP analysis I mentioned earlier, and that's the ideal client profile. So are we targeting the right folks? And one of the clients I had, we did this across all of their deals. And one of the interesting things was like, we were focused on the wrong ICP. So our conversion was really, really low in that ICP. Our ACV was kind of towards the middle. But then we had this, once we looked at the data and broke it out, we realized we had an entirely different ICP that was a fraction of the marketing activity we were doing, a fraction of the sales activity, that was converting at 4 times better, at 3-4 times higher deal sizes. So without even fundamentally changing anything we were doing, or how we were selling, I should say, without changing how we were selling, is who we're selling to, who we're targeting, increased our conversion pretty rapidly, and our deal sizes as well. So it starts there, looking at our deal client profile, our deal client profiles, I should say, how we're converting across each of them, what are our average, I said ACV, let me give you the acronym for that too, average contract value, and looking at that across each of these segments to make sure we're targeting the right one, because that small shift can have a 10x multiplier effect if you're focused in the wrong space, and then you shift to the right one. I would start there, and then I would move towards looking at our funnel from top to bottom. So with the top of the funnel is, we set a meeting with a prospect. Then we actually hold the meeting, and then it goes kind of step by step all the way down to being closed won. And looking at where deals falling off, and start to think about why that would be the case, and start to think about solutions, things that could potentially help solve how things flow through from cycle to cycle. One of the most basic things there I find, and this is something that sellers still are guilty of not doing, even though it's one of the most basic things, just making sure we have a next step scheduled on the calendar before we get off the last call with a prospect. That helps a ton, things just flowing through the funnel. So I think those are the two basic ones. One, are we targeting the right folks, and can we look at the data and understand that and see that? And two, looking at our funnel, how things flow through, what are our follow-off points? Are we making sure we're doing kind of the basic things like setting a call before we get off to make sure things are flowing through as effectively as possible? And we're looking at that funnel, identify where we can get better, and being proactive and trying new things to try and improve our funnel conversion from stage to stage.
Fantastic. And so for anybody listening in, like, I'm totally engrossed in what Tyler is delivering here, because you might have heard some of these things, in abstract, like in different pieces here and there, but the ability to put all of this together into one working system is a talent within itself. There's very few people that are actually able to glue that together and actually oversee that process, and have that responsibility and accountability that kind of Tyler brings to the table. So I do implore you to get in touch with Tyler. Tyler, where's the best place for people to contact you?
Absolutely. My email address is tyler@revignition.io. And my website is revenueignition.io.
Superb. And I love the name as well, because I was just going to say, you're like the revenue mechanic. It's like, all the different parts of the engine, and, all that good stuff. Zan, do you have any closing comments?
Tyler, it was really, really great listening to you, and very valuable to me, of course, as a salesperson. Really appreciate your time, and wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, Tyler Brock, thank you so much for being a guest, and hopefully we can have you on again soon. And thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in to another episode of Fractional Impact.